Dave Rauch from ProTech Building Services, and I'm here today with Mindy Young. And Mindy's joining us here on the Maintenance Manager to tell us a little bit about her history and what's going on in her world, in the community management world. And I've known Mindy for 30 years, 25 years. Mindy and I served on the CAI Board of Directors together, I think back in 1997, 8, something like that. And so anyhow, Mindy, welcome aboard here. We appreciate your time. You want to tell us a little bit about when you got into the industry and how you got into the industry and so forth?
Sure. I was working for doctors, and a girlfriend of mine said, "Hey, my mom has a job that you might like," and I was making $800 a month, and I said, "How much does this job pay?" And she said $1,200 a month, and I said, "Sure, I'll take the job." And so I was initially hired as a secretary to a real estate broker to start an office for a management company out of Orange County. And so we were hired to start managing the units built at La Jolla Colony, so that the first escrow closed the end of June 1984.
Wow, La Jolla Colony. And what year was that? 1984.
Right.
And La Jolla Colony, what company?
The company was called Mercury Property Management, and there's a lot of history with Mercury. A lot of people in San Diego and throughout the state that came from there. Mercury became Marquis, but I had left there before all of that happened.
Yep. And I think I remember that Cynthia Van Cleve, who started Prescott, came out of Mercury.
Yes. When I left the San Diego office, I think Cynthia was coming from Rancho Cucamonga, and that's when she came down to San Diego and took over what was then Marquis operations, and went from there.
Fantastic. And did you go into the industry right as a manager, or did you go in doing something else, doing a little paperwork, or how were you thrust into the industry?
Well, my first day on the job, I went to an office on Miramar Road. Now, the letterhead said La Jolla. So right away, you kind of knew that the company was not big into truth in advertising. But I showed up, and I walked into an empty office with 2 folding lawn chairs and a man by the name of Jack Braverman. And he handed me a roll of quarters and said, "You need to go to that Del Taco and start calling the corporate office and find out when we get furniture." Well, this was pre-cell phone, right?
Wow.
1984, pre-cell phone, pre-all that stuff. So I was supposed to be his secretary, and we were in a car accident a month later, and he did not come back to work at Mercury, and so I was in an office by myself, and I had a typewriter, a phone, and CC&Rs.
Holy moly.
5 associations.
There you go. And there probably were a lot less associations, community associations around in 84, 85.
Oh, very much so. I mean, the density that we see now did not exist. By the time I left Mercury, we had taken on, we were the first management company for Carmel Mountain Ranch Residential. We were the first management company for East Lake One. We were managing La Jolla Colony. And at that time, those were the biggest things that were happening in San Diego County. So it was exciting. Mercury didn't end up keeping any of those. They all went to Walters, but I got to work on the very beginnings of them.
Speaking of Walters, you're now at Walters Management, and I think you're in charge of management, director of management.
Well, I'm one of 3 senior VPs, and we have 4 offices, and so I have been supervising the San Diego and the South County operations. And so Barry's been doing the Carlsbad and Murrieta, and it looks like he's going to be doing all four now.
Ah, yes,
So,
yes, I heard.
yeah, he'll have a lot on his plate.
You may be leaving Walters, is that the truth?
It's not May. Tomorrow is my last day at Walters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So going backwards, did you go right from from Mercury to Walters Management?
No, I worked with two kind of startup organizations that I had ownership ownership interest in. I worked for attorneys, construction defect attorneys for a year, and then I went to work at Walters.
Ah, I see. Interesting. And I know you were very involved in CAI and CACM.
Correct.
You were recently a leader at CACM. You want to tell us a little bit about CAI and then CACM? I know we were on the board together a while back.
Right. Well, with CACM, one of the things I say now, or what I believe, and it's very similar to the classes I facilitate for CACM, is that 20 plus years ago, what we did then doesn't really apply to what people do now. You know, the number of the board members may be the same, there's still some trade shows, there's some of that, but I was involved in a time when CAI was going broke, right as I was chair of CAI or president. We had to move all of our operations into the executive director's garage, and really I was a bridge as the president between moving into a garage and then having sufficient funds to move into an office and go from there. And who followed me was Adrian McKibben. And Adrian McKibben, Pat Campbell, they were people who were instrumental really in helping CAI grow. I mean, they, you know, knew a lot of vendors, they knew a lot of people, and they had a lot of enthusiasm. So, you know, it's still a very small kind of parochial world in San Diego. And I see the pictures from people in CAI, and it looks like they're kind of doing the same thing, but the faces have changed. You know, it's for young people, for lack of a better way to phrase it.
Well, I do remember I was on the board with Patrick, and he was very successful in bringing in a lot of new members. Now, question for you. I know in my opinion, I think one of the biggest problems we have with the industry, with the business model of condominium management and ownership, is the fact that boards aren't educated, right? There's no educational requirements. And so oftentimes boards are hesitant and reluctant to increase assessments on their neighbors, on themselves. And, you know, that's very difficult because really they forget they're running a business. And so was there any, at CAI or CM, any attempt to address that issue? And also, do you think that's the number one issue that the industry faces?
I think the issue ebbs and flows. I mean, there was a period of time where that wasn't necessarily a problem, where first of all, we weren't facing the inflation, we weren't, you know, the real estate market was a lot stronger, and so you and I both have been in this business long enough to recognize the cyclic nature of the business. So you see that board members now are facing the same issues associated with lack of funds, and I could go on forever and ever and ever about deferred maintenance and those things. I think board members are getting more educated. It's true that they are not required to get more educated, but I'm running into more and more board members who really understand that they are running the business. And I think that being a board member is a very difficult job. It's, I mean, it's volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot leave your home without someone wanting to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
The laws that you have to follow are getting more and more draconian, and so it's not a fun job.
Yeah.
And so I get why there is reluctance to do things that are unpopular.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say that because, as we know, just when you think that that's enough new law, that here's another new 10 laws, next year there's 10 more, and then 10 more after that. It's just amazing how many laws get heaped upon the industry.
It is.
Every time there's a problem, there's a new law. But anyhow, switching over to the community manager, as you mentioned, there's a lot of younger community managers. And have you seen any tools, any things that can help those managers? In other words, I know that there's going to be a lot of new managers watching this video.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give them for trying to succeed in this industry, which we know it's hard for board members?
Right.
Any tools that they could use, in other words, communication with their boards, communication with the vendors?
Well, I'm a big proponent on the education, and we didn't talk about CACM, but
Mm-hmm.
I believe that there are so many opportunities for managers to learn about our industry that did not exist when I was involved. Now, whether it's programs that your firm puts on or that the attorneys put on or, vendors that are willing to come in and do lunch and learns, all of these sorts of things, and the certifications I think are essential.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is, and it's happened to us at Walters too, is that by the time someone's hiring a manager, they've lost a manager and they have a book of
Mm-hmm.
business that needs to be managed right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that manager is truly getting baptized by fire. And so then, you're saying to them, but look, you need to spend a day at this seminar, or you need to spend time to go here. And they're just trying to get through 125 emails.
Right.
And that doesn't equate for them.
Mm-hmm.
The other part that's different, I think, is that, there are generational differences. And so, when you are of a younger generation, I don't think that you've had as much exposure, I guess, than we might have to, okay, this is how you put things together, and this is what you do. And when to backtrack, one of the best experiences I ever had was on one of the very first associations I worked on. They were in construction defect litigation. I had to go through about 5 years of minutes and look for different types of things. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't, it was a stack of paper this big. And when you're forced to learn that stuff, it teaches you in many ways what not to do in terms of moving forward. And so that immediate exposure where you have to figure it out, there was no one to give me any answers, makes a difference.
So in other words, just jump in, do it, learn, go to different seminars where you can, when you can, and just don't be afraid, right?
The thing that I say to managers is that, and I didn't make this up, but you've got to be willing to say, I don't know. The worst thing you can do, I think, is say, well, you do da-da-da-da. Most people are not upset if you say, I don't know. I'll find out, and I'll get the answer back to you. The second is you have to be willing to say, I was wrong. And I run into managers who, in our business, ultimately the board makes the decisions. And I had a board meeting this year where I'm thinking, I have 38 years of experience and you're not listening to anything I'm saying. And it's very tempting to say, you don't know what you're talking about, but it's the client. So you leave those situations feeling very frustrated, and that kind of breeds this desire to hold on to be right all the time. You have to be willing to be wrong. And then you also have to be willing to apologize and say, I'm sorry, I screwed this up. I will fix it. I will figure out what we need to do. But it's fascinating to me how many people will just blame it on someone else, where when you say, I'm responsible for this, I did it, I apologize, it breeds respect with the individuals that you're working with. And then I think the last thing is pay attention. Young people, I think, and there are a lot of skills they have that I really appreciate, but the ability to read people and to interact with them and to really listen to what they're saying and what their facial expressions are telling you, and their body language, and of course virtual meetings haven't helped this, but that's not something that this latest age group learned. I mean, they didn't learn that way.
Yeah.
And
the digital age group.
Right. And I can't figure out how to work Adobe half the time, so I respect that lack of knowledge, but we're in a people business. It's a customer service business. And I had a manager who was upset because a board member called her kiddo. And while I appreciated that she was upset, the homeowner that did this is in his 80s. So for him, that was not a sign of disrespect. That was almost affection. And she read it as, you've just disrespected me. And, and what I want to say is, trust me, you're going to get to an age where you'll be grateful someone called you kiddo. You're not there yet, but you'll get there.
Well, that's some great advice for our new community managers and even more seasoned community managers. And I think we touched on real quick that a while back that there's a lot of manager turnover. I think every day we're constantly changing our database to reflect the changes in people moving to different companies. Is that a cultural thing? In other words, are management companies creating a culture that is inviting and wants to keep people around, or is it just, if somebody finds a couple bucks an hour more over here, they're going to go over there? What do you think the state of the turnover is here?
I agree with you. I think turnover has always been endemic in our industry. It is worse now than I have ever seen it. But I think the problem is complicated. I think that it goes from everything to, clearly management culture, but also something that you touched on about working in this industry. Our boards of directors will say things like, we've got a great manager, we don't ever want to lose this manager, keep this person happy, and then when you say, okay, we haven't had an increase in management fees for 4 years, you need to give us 5%, that creates a lot of angst. And from my perspective, our board members understanding that we aren't a nonprofit. We are a business, and stability is key to your operations, but we can't keep that if you're not willing to recognize the value of what we bring. And similarly to what you do, I mean, our biggest costs are labor. And there's only so much you can convert to technology. I think the other problem is that what happens to a lot of new managers and a lot of managers who've been in the business for a while is that a new person comes in, they're very enthusiastic, they kick butt for whatever period of time that is. Usually and the board's very happy, usually by the second to third year, the stuffing starts to come out, the flaws start to show, and that's about the time that you'll see managers move. Because suddenly they're facing the mistakes that they made. But lately, I think the biggest reason for turnover has to do with the employment market. Management companies, it used to be 20 years ago that if one of our clients was unhappy and they called another management company, that person would give me a call or give Joe Farinelli a call and say, hey, I want to let you know they're looking. And we would have this kind of courtesy. That's been gone for a very long time. I mean, our biggest clients are marketed directly from the national organizations. And in this environment, our managers are marketed directly from national organizations. I mean, they'll literally call the manager at our office and say, we'll give you X amount of money, and they make promises they can't keep. You're only going to have to manage 5 properties, or, and so the turnover issue is got a lot of different things that impact it. And then after being in this business for 38 years, the last 4 years have probably been the most difficult ever.
Yeah.
And that is because of the way people are willing to treat each other. I mean, the stuff that our homeowners will say to our staff it's insane. And so what happens is that people just get worn out.
Yeah.
Everything you do is a problem, and no one says thank you, and they can't take it one more second.
No, it can be a very difficult business, as we know. You take a lot of tough calls, take a lot of flack at board meetings sometimes, and people just want to vent. It's a very difficult business. And I personally think, that one of the big problems in the last 3-4 years with COVID was there were 4, 5, 6 million people that actually just left the workforce, and you had that going on simultaneously with Walmart hiring hundreds of thousands of people, and these other big firms hiring hundreds of thousands of people. It made the job market crazy.
It did.
So that's a very unusual, hopefully one-time thing, because it's been tough on us too, hiring.
Yeah. The labor market is very challenging. And then I think the other thing that happened is all the people that stayed at home. So suddenly your volume of calls or the volume of emails doubles, because where you maybe had a third of the community that were home during the day and let you know when there was a piece of trash on the sidewalk, now you've got twice as many people. Now, in many ways, that made our job easier because there's more, we're not there all the time, we're not on site, but it also, the number of, we can't really navigate neighbor-to-neighbor disputes, but the number of calls we received about my next-door neighbor's kids are playing outside, I'm trying to work, it's too loud, do something. The number of those calls went crazy because people aren't used to living and working in that kind of closed community. And so, it made an impact that was significant. And then companies like ours and yours had to pivot in many ways that we did business. And, you know, I think much of our industry can go remote, but by the same token, a manager in a company like ours and Walters is one part of the entire puzzle.
Right.
And when you don't have good communication from that, you know, that's the front person, the point person for the board. When that person doesn't have good communication with the rest of the team, then inevitably the service level suffers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was going to comment too about what you were talking about, which was the fact that there's no balance. So, in my opinion, I think that assessments should almost be increased automatically every year. I think management company contracts should be increased automatically every year, along with all vendor contracts. You know, you got to continue to pay people, whether they're an employee, a manager, a vendor, you know, a little bit more every year because of the cost of living. So if you don't do that, it's just leading to huge problems. And I think it starts with the board of directors being difficult to raise assessments.
I think so. I think also, you know, our contracts and many other management company contracts have an automatic, you know, increase. But as a service industry, and then, you know, and maybe we as a company have gone too far one way, because I know one of the questions is, what are you the most proud of at being at Walters? And one of those things is that for the last 10 years, we've enjoyed a retention rate of over 95%. That's unheard of.
Yeah, that's
in
great.
Our industry. It's really unheard of. And that doesn't mean, you know, that 95 isn't a result of what we added and what we lost. It was these same group. So you're constantly making decisions about, okay, all the expense with uploading a new association, and you know this too, the first time you're on a job, all that effort is very front loaded. And so, and boards can take, I mean, I've marketed associations that it took them 2 years to finally make a decision to come with us. So you've spent a lot of money, and then you've got it to a system that you feel comfortable with, they're happy, everybody's happy, and then it's like, okay, do we want to poke the hornet's nest with this, or do we want to ride this a little bit longer, keep our client a little bit happier?
Right.
You know, where are things going? And the clients, I don't think they really understand how much time things take.
Yeah, well, again, I think it comes down to education.
I agree.
If we could somehow mandate education, I think that would be the best thing in the world. And, you know, the interesting secret is that vendors, especially vendors like us that work with a lot of management companies, we know which are the companies and managers that are very efficient, professional, productive, and get it.
Right.
And so I can say without hesitation that Walters is one of the best companies out there. And you've done a magnificent, and I mean a tremendous job out there. And I'm not just saying that to blow smoke. Really, you've done an amazing job. One last thing I want to touch on, because I know we're reaching the end here, is management company roll-ups. Now, you were around to see Associa buy Jasky, and then it bought PCM and Prescott, and they're still buying companies. And then First Service bought Merit, and I think who else? There's other companies buying companies around.
Turner and Rossi out of Carlsbad. I mean, nationally, there's all sorts of companies that they purchased.
And on balance, and I don't want to get too much into this, but on balance, do you think that's a good thing, these roll-ups?
First, I want to say about the compliment about Walters. The thing that has made Walters successful is the team of people there. It's not any one person, and I think that's important because often, no one recognizes our HR. And we have longevity at Walters that I don't think anybody enjoys, any of our competitors. I have mixed feelings about the roll-up, and I'll tell you why. I think that in the big scheme of things, and I'm talking nationally, and I'm talking about, where I see common interest developments going long term, I think that these organizations, to a great extent, have somewhat of the right idea in that they've learned how to commoditize some of our services. And I think any service industry, that's becoming more and more the norm. I think what happens is that you end up with, the bulk of associations that you and I work with are anywhere from 50 units to 300 units. The big whales, the master plan communities, those are the anomalies. Those are the exceptions. Well, that bulk of associations, they're being left in the dust because they're not paying the fees to command the type of attention that they need as their infrastructure ages. And they get lost in a big company where everything is standardized. By the same token, if you can't standardize in an environment that has a very small profit margin, how do you make any money to grow the business and continue to go? So I don't think that the roll-ups are all good, all bad. I think that they are reflective of what is happening in our country. You see this with all sorts of different organizations. And so I think it's part of the future. And then you'll see still some of these, sole proprietor companies where, they're still managing property and maybe they've got 2 or 3 other managers and, they're still providing service. But those companies cannot compete with a national organization that can say, well, we have this app and we have a marketing department that curates all of the posts about us on the internet. We do these things to embellish our presence. You can't compete with that.
Right.
So it's like anything. It's not all good. It's not all bad.
Yeah, and we'll see how it goes. So anyhow, Mindy, thank you so much for being with us here today and sharing so much great insight with our audience.
I'm happy
and
to.
Thank you for all your years of great service to our industry.
Thank you.